David Linden. Number one.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have regular discussions with Welsh ministers on a range of issues, including EU negotiations. The Joint Ministerial Committee on EU negotiation meets regularly. My Cabinet and ministerial colleagues frequently meet ministers from the devolved administrations.
David Linden.
Speaker, tomorrow is the day that the Prime Minister has set for his deadline for a trade deal with the EU. So far, the devolved administrations have been left out of the loop or deliberately kept in the dark on key details. Does the Secretary of State believe that withholding key information in detail at such a stage as this shows respect or disrespect to the devolved administration?
Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't recognise the accusation that he makes, given the number of meetings that I personally have been in with ministers from the devolved nations, let alone other colleagues. It would be a difficult charge to land to suggest that they haven't been closely involved with the process right from the beginning. And I suspect his comments are really based on the fact that he doesn't like the reality of what's going on rather than has a legitimate comment to make.
First of two questions, Liz Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Lefarydd. Last week it was revealed that his government had actively sought to conceal information from the Welsh Government. This information included the likelihood of food shortages and their intention to grab new powers. This doesn't sound like intergovernmental parity of esteem. As Secretary of State for Wales, where does his role to represent the Tory party in Wales stop and his role to build trust and mutual respect start?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the first responsibility in this particular context is to respect the fact that 55% of people in Wales voted to leave the European Union. And it seems to me astonishing that the party of Wales, represented by the Honourable Lady, is still so out of step with the people of Wales when it comes to that. The clock is not being turned back, and what we're attempting to do is to deliver a deal which respects that decision and all of the institutions in Wales, which I thought we both valued.
Liz Roberts.
Our trust, I think, in politicians is sadly diminishing at this time because politicians are not seen to answer the question at hand. But back to the matter of trust. Transmission rates indicate that Wales stands on the brink of a circuit breaker announcement. Businesses in Wales and people who need to self-isolate seek assurance that they can trust the Treasury to back up COVID-19 control measures made in Wales for Wales. Can he guarantee the people of Wales that they can indeed trust his government to do this?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, having seen the Chancellor ensure that Welsh Government has had £4.4 billion worth of UK taxpayers' money for exactly this purpose, I hope that she would actually share my view that we are looking at the UK in the round. This is an international problem, COVID. It doesn't respect political boundaries, and the Chancellor's announcement make it very clear that he sees all of the UK as a priority, not just individual component parts, and I would think the numbers speak for themselves.
For withdrawn, Simon Baynes.
Question number 5, please, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, we have, of course, worked hand in hand with the Welsh Government throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The Secretary of State for Wales, myself, have regular discussions with Welsh ministers about the ongoing UK-wide response to COVID-19, and those include discussions between the Secretary of State, the First Minister, and, of course, meetings between the UK Government and all devolved institutions.
Simon Baynes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Restricting the virus is vital, but the Welsh Government's lockdown measures in Clwyd South and the rest of North Wales need reviewing, given the difficulties they are causing, particularly for hospitality, wedding industry and leisure businesses, by using county boundaries rather than being targeted on the specific areas with high COVID case numbers. Would the Minister be able to outline how often the Welsh Government has invited the UK Government to participate in their COVID-19 planning meetings, and whether they have discussed using more detailed evidence by community rather than just by county?
Well, Mr Speaker, that is a very good question, because, of course, whilst the UK Government extends an open invitation to the devolved administrations to take part in COBRA meetings and ministerial implementation groups, the same spirit of cooperation has not thus far been forthcoming. I was invited to one meeting by the Welsh Government ministers, but only to discuss the parts that were reserved anyway for the UK Government. So we stand ready to accept the same level of cooperation from Welsh Government that we have always extended to them in the UK Government.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With cases rising across the UK, the First Minister has called for an extraordinary meeting of COBRA to discuss plans for a so-called circuit break lockdown. The measures are already under active consideration in Wales and will be implemented by Welsh Government if they need to be. But of course, any such measures work well and are more effective if we take them as a four-nation approach when applied across the whole of the UK. So will the Government now listen to its own scientific advisers and to those of us on these benches and agree to meet with devolved nations to discuss these specific proposals?
Mr Speaker, throughout this pandemic, the Government have listened to a wide range of scientific advisers. Some of them will be advising circuit breakers, others will be suggesting that, that measures are too strict. The Government have listened to all, have tried to steer a course through the middle of this. They've listened to Welsh Government ministers on numerous occasions. Over 100 such meetings have taken place, and will continue to listen with an open mind and to follow the evidence.
Anna McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, unlike this Tory government in England, our Labour government in Wales does follow the science. The rules in Wales stop people from taking the virus with them from high to low prevalence areas, protecting people's lives. We want the same for visitors to Wales from across the rest of the UK where rates are even higher. So why is it that this Tory government is ignoring the First Minister yet again, failing to stand up for the people of Wales, playing politics with people's lives?
Well, Mr Speaker, we certainly aren't playing politics with people's lives. The Honourable Lady will surely be aware that 25% of the workforce of Wales actually travel over to England to work there. And playing politics with people's lives potentially means looking at livelihoods as well. The reality is that we have followed the science all the way through this process, and more or less the Welsh Government have followed exactly what the UK Government are doing.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Honourable Lady says that we should follow the science. Well, 10 minutes ago, Public Health Wales told me that they didn't even carry out a community-level analysis prior to instigating these lockdown measures. So would my honourable friend agree with me that this virus doesn't respect county borders, and once again that all the Labour Welsh Government is doing is throttling businesses and letting down the people of North Wales?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I firstly wish my honourable friend Penboy's Happis tomorrow, and say that it is the case, of course, that this virus doesn't respect boundaries, but the UK Government does respect boundaries, and whilst I fully accept that some people may have concerns about the slightly different approach that the Welsh Government sometimes adopts in this matter, the UK Government respects devolution, respects the reality of Welsh Government, and my role as a minister is to work constructively with Welsh Government ministers. I don't, at this moment, wish to start playing politics and criticising them.
Number 8, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Chief Secretary of Treasury wrote to the Honourable Member last week to confirm he's expecting to provide £2.5 million needed for the tip repairs in Tylerstown and his constituency. The letter also clarifies he is waiting to hear further from Welsh Government on additional request to access the reserve.
Well, that was useless, yet again. It's been months now that I've been asking for the money for the Rhondda. The Prime Minister wrote to me in June saying that he recognised that Wales had been particularly badly hit by Storm Dennis and that the UK Government would look seriously at any requests for funding. I'm delighted we've got the £2.5 million for the Tylerstown tip, but frankly we need £60 million to mend culverts, drains, make people's houses secure, both in Pontypridd and in the Rhondda and across the whole of RCT. Make sure you earn your money by getting us our money in the Rhondda.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What a contrast to the conversation we had last week when I reported this news to him, where he was charm and diplomacy itself, and yet when he gets into the chamber with an audience, he becomes a different personality. But I will remind him, just in case he forgot, what the Chief Secretary's letter actually says. Amongst other things, I'm expecting to provide required funding. That's in relation to the Welsh Government confirming it will make a reserve claim for 2020-2021. And so this process is underway. It does require Welsh Government to come to the party too. It hasn't done so yet, and of course a lot of this is in the devolved space, so we can't just pick and choose which bits of devolution suit his particular desire to make a statement in the chamber.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Question 9, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 9 and 10 together. Had regular discussions with the Chancellor, and we spoke only last week. Chancellor since announced a significant package of further job support and an additional £400 million of funding for Welsh Government, totalling 4.4.
Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tourism and hospitality is the backbone of the economy of the Gower Peninsula. My constituent Lara Jocelyn runs the King's Head in Llangennith. She is fighting to keep her family business alive. Lara runs a popular rural pub and accommodation, and like many others in Gower, this provides vital part-time jobs to local people. Why is the Secretary of State not banging on the door of the Treasury to right the wrong of the job support scheme to support independent hospitality businesses like Lara's?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady and I have similar dependence on tourism in our particular constituencies, so I understand absolutely the argument she's making about its value. But I will remind her that so far the UK taxpayers have contributed £1.1 billion by way of bounce-back loans, £490 million self-employed income support, £303 million coronavirus business interruption, £30 million worth of Eat Out, Help Out, future funding £7 million. I would carry on, Mr. Speaker, if only you would let me. That's not to mention 401,000 employees on furlough too. The Treasury has gone above and beyond the international average and trying to get to every single business in every single area of the UK, and that includes Gower just as much as it does anywhere else.
Come on.
Mr. Speaker, for those who are able to access the government's new job support scheme, and many are locked out or deemed by the government to be in unviable jobs, a cut of a third of the wages for the low paid makes it extremely hard to pay bills and feed families. Does the Secretary of State really get this? And if so, will Welsh Office ministers fight to get a better scheme?
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. We've often in this question session talked about the fact that there will always be those in all of our constituencies who don't quite fit every single one of the intervention measures that the Chancellor has announced over the last few months. In those circumstances, of course, we want to be as flexible as possible. Of course, we want to try and find ways, either through the intervention schemes or through universal credit, to support the hardest hit families as best we can. And where there are individual examples of those gaps, then of course, if she brings them to my attention, I will do my best to address them.
Secretary of State Neil Griffith with the first of 2 questions.
Mr. Speaker, well, throughout this pandemic, Welsh businesses have done all that they can to stay open and stay trading, with so many drawing on the support grants and loans that have been so important in keeping them afloat. But as more areas of the country come under local restrictions, with trading halted or severely limited, and fears about public confidence, many businesses feel that they've absolutely maxed out on their borrowing and are worried about the future. So what plan does the government have to support these businesses that are now heavily in debt, to make sure that the burden of repayments in the coming months does not mean that they go under?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start really by expressing some confusion that on the one hand, members opposite are articulating a Welsh Government view that the existing interventions aren't strict enough, and then the Honourable Lady gets to her feet and says actually they're almost imposing undue hardship. So it's quite difficult to know exactly where they do stand on these getting a balance right between disease control and maintaining a vibrant economy. However, what I would say to her is that each and every stage of this process, the Chancellor has been flexible and adaptable, recognised that the situation is changing often by the hour, let alone by the day or week. And the financial interventions, which up till now have been about £4.4 billion by way of Barnetised contribution to Welsh Government, and you could probably double that for the other interventions which are more direct, those are the measures which we think have supported business in Wales up till now. But of course, as the circumstances change and our reaction change, so we will remain flexible.
And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we have always said that any restrictions need to be backed up with proper financial support measures for business. But to reduce the spread of the virus, it's vital also that workers who are unwell or asked to self-isolate do actually stay off work. But as hours are reduced in sectors like hospitality, an increasing number of Welsh workers will find themselves falling below the minimum weekly earnings threshold needed to qualify for statutory sick pay. To expect them to live off nothing for a fortnight is totally unacceptable. Will the Secretary of State urge the Chancellor to do the decent thing and to extend the statutory sick pay scheme to all workers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know from my sort of personal contact with the Chancellor over the last few weeks that he's looking at all of these particular options. That's why the winter resilience measures were brought in a week or so ago, on top of all of the other measures which he has introduced and which recognise the very difficult situation so many people find themselves in. So, of course, you know, I'm not going to stand here and say we're never going to consider another option. Of course we will. We will always look at the individual circumstances, particularly of those who are hardest hit.
Let's head to Wales with Howell Williams. Howell Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to our recent meeting with various COVID funding measures being announced by his governments, sometimes seemingly haphazardly and causing some confusion. A bit for football here, a bit for the arts there. And now apparently Baynes funding for universities in Wales, even though this matter is devolved. With all that happening, will he consider publishing a regular, simple table of government's COVID funding and the consequential amounts for Wales, if there are such?
Honourable Gentleman makes a good point about universities. Of course, it is devolved and yet hugely dependent on the union effort. But in answer to his very direct question, I can give him a very direct yes.
With 14 withdrawn, Andrew Griffith.
Question number 15, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to driving forward each of the growth deals in Wales, and since March have taken part in 24 meetings with representatives of Wales city and growth deals. I recently visited Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire constituency after approving the Pembroke Dock Marine Development, one of the many growth deal projects which will be contributing to levelling up in Wales.
The Prime Minister last week outlined how we can build back better by investing in areas like hydrogen, green energy and electric mobility. Does he agree with me that it's an opportunity for the whole United Kingdom, but particularly to put Wales at the heart of that green revolution?
Very happy to agree with that question, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's commitment last week was a game changer, quadrupling offshore wind energy by 2030, doubling the amount of support for renewables projects, £160 million support in infrastructure and 1 gigawatt of new floating wind projects. This is all the clear evidence of this government's commitment to a green and resilient economic recovery from the coronavirus.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Internal Market Bill will protect seamless trade across the United Kingdom, something that will benefit people in all corners of the UK and indeed of this House. Our market access guarantee will provide certainty for Welsh businesses as the transition period ends and provide a firm foundation upon which businesses may flourish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for his answer. Obviously, in Newcastle-under-Lyme, the whole of Staffordshire, indeed the whole of the West Midlands, there are a number of businesses that both source and supply from Wales. These businesses need the certainty that standards will be observed and that what they produce will be able to be sold into different markets around the United Kingdom and particularly in Wales. Will you confirm that the UK Internal Market Bill will deliver on that?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can absolutely confirm that. I hope all members of this House are listening to the wise words from the Honourable Gentleman. The bill provides a vital guarantee that businesses in his constituency and in all constituencies across the UK will be able to continue to trade confidently within our internal market as the transition period ends.
John Morrison.
Number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government has provided a support package to Welsh businesses and communities in recent weeks, including the Government's £30 billion plan for jobs. Our ambition remains to secure jobs, stimulate growth and provide opportunities to level up Wales.
John Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Minister for his financial support for Wales and for the devolved Welsh Government. My question is, what if the Welsh Government want to trigger further restrictions? Does my right honourable friend agree that if the Welsh Government wants to go beyond government measures, which measures should ultimately be a source of last resort, then it needs to provide plans for how it will financially support the industries that will be hit as a result?
Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and I think that the Barnetised numbers totalling £4.4 billion so far do give Welsh Government a degree of flexibility in addressing issues if the evidence supports it in a slightly different way. And there are one or two examples of where they have introduced their own interventions courtesy of money provided by UK taxpayers. But the overriding point is that there does need to be a degree of collaboration, cooperation, which straddles all of the countries of the UK, because this is an international and a national challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like me, the Secretary of State would have welcomed the vision set out by the Prime Minister last week for expanding renewable energy and, importantly, that commitment to boosting floating offshore wind power, which represents such a big opportunity for us in Wales. So can I ask my right honourable friend if he would use his good offices to make sure now that all of the relevant players in this, the private sector developers who've got projects ready to go, Baynes, the Crown Estate, which of course owns the seabed, are all on the same page working towards a shared goal so that we get decisions made in a timely way?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, absolutely. I agree with my right honourable friends and neighbours' assessment of the situation, and we were all encouraged by the Minister's comments just now in that respect. I hope, encourage him by saying I'm meeting the Crown Estate the day after tomorrow, I think it is, to discuss the potential delays, which at the moment look like being their problem, and we need to unblock that.
Come to question 19. It's a substantive to Secretary Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have frequent discussions with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. At least 510,000 people in Wales have been directly supported by the measures we have so far put in place. However, of course, the best possible support we can provide is to get behind the national effort and public health guidelines to ensure we overcome this crisis sooner rather than later.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Rosie Cooper. Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the UK's unemployment rate at its highest level in 3 years, it's clear that many workers in Wales will need to rely on social security in order to get back on the feet. Does the Secretary of State agree that it's only fair to update legacy benefits such as job seekers allowance and employment support allowance to match the increase in universal credit that was announced earlier this year?
Thank you, Honourable Lady, for her comments. And of course, conversations I've had with DWP and indeed the Chancellor have touched on this very issue, which is why the arrangements as far as universal credit have been as flexible as they can. The effort by the Department to make sure everybody is accounted for and those who might fall into the gaps we referred to earlier on are properly looked after. That is very much uppermost in the minds of Cabinet and ministerial colleagues, and I can give her that assurance.
We now have substantive to Minister Davies from Jamie Stone. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Government are committed to to rolling out broadband across the United Kingdom, although we have much work to do. I'm pleased that 15% of premises in Wales have access to full fibre broadband, compared to only 14% in the UK as a whole. And only a fortnight ago, I was able to go out with an innovative Welsh SME, Beacons Telecom, who are helping to deliver broadband in remote and rural parts of Wales, the parts of Wales that Openreach seemingly cannot reach.
We've now got Scotland with Jamie Stone. Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect that my question will come as no surprise to you. I represent one of the most remote parts of the UK, and far too many of my constituents simply cannot get decent connectivity. Could the Minister please share his experience and his know-how with the Scottish Government so that we can get this problem sorted out?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the Scottish Government care to issue me an invitation, I stand ready to serve and offer advice such as I can. But actually, I think my advice is that there are innovative small companies out there who are able to do things that Openreach apparently can't do, and I saw an example of it in Wales. I'm sure there must be many others. But can I assure the honourable gentleman that as one who is committed to the Union, our broadband ambitions span not just Wales, but the whole of the United Kingdom, from the tip of Penzance right up to the coast of Caithness and beyond.
Number
21, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 21 and 22 together. The Government is fully committed to the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom. Our response to the COVID-19 outbreak has clearly demonstrated the value of Wales being a part of the Union, with a package of UK Government support that frankly goes well beyond anything which the Welsh Government could offer alone. It is clear that our four nations are safer and more prosperous when we stand together.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. It is very good news that the Government has appointed Sir Peter to undertake a detailed review into how the quality and availability of transport infrastructure can support economic growth across the UK, as well as the quality of life across the UK. Will the Minister advise what his department's priorities are for this review in Wales?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, our priorities clearly will be better transport links, ensuring that Wales is better connected to the rest of the Union. But the ambitions for the Government go well beyond transport infrastructure. We believe that Wales is an integral part of the United Kingdom, and we want to see not just good transport links, but our historical links, our cultural links, because we believe that one is quite easily able to be proud to be Welsh and proud to be British in this union.
Final question from Sir Lane Saxby in Devon. Sir Lane Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From Ilfracombe to Exmoor in my North Devon constituency, you can see South Wales. Does my honourable friend agree that we should look at the options for better connecting these two areas to strengthen the links between our economies and ultimately the Union?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I entirely agree with what the Honourable Lady has said. This Government is going to strengthen all links within the United Kingdom. We are the Conservative and Unionist, a Conservative and Unionist Government, and I look forward to support on all sides of the House. Thank you.
Before Prime Minister's question time, I wish to make a short statement. On Monday, in an answer to a question from the Honourable Member for Swansea West about the virtual participation